Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hello, Stefanie.
Hello there.
How was Italy?
Oh, it was so good. It was just beautiful. It was such scenery to take in all the time. I feel like I didn't stop looking around me and just being like, every time I did, I wasn't getting used to it. It was like, oh my gosh, that's just beautiful. There's so much depth everywhere in the cliff sides and I just couldn't stop feeling grateful for what was around me. Yeah, it was really, really, really nice. How was your trip? Because we were away at the same time.
I know, we haven't really had a chance to catch up since. So I was in Greece for a week at a friend's wedding. It was all right. The weather wasn't great. We had 3 days of sunshine and 3 days of cloud and rain. And I think as an extrovert, I was quite excited about going away with a lot of people because I think I had this fantasy in my mind about what that was going to look like socially.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up feeling socially awkward for a lot of the trip. Felt very kind of on the outside of things and like, yeah, it left me feeling a bit weird. I talk about it in my YouTube video today as well.
Okay. I'll note that. Did you know anybody else on the trip?
Yeah. Well, most of them were acquaintances as opposed to close friends.
Did you journal about it?
Well, it's interesting you say that because we put something up in our community group and someone had put something on there about not wanting to journal because there's like a fear of having to face something. So at the time, I remember feeling particularly resistant to journaling and also interesting us doing this episode at this time as well, because I've now been back 4 days and I'm still feeling that resistance to journaling. I did a couple of paragraphs last night. I can't even tell you what happened. My mind just ended up drifting off in another direction, like mid journaling. And then I got distracted by something else. And then I was editing our next week's podcast episode at 11:30 in bed. And that is never me. Like I'm a lights out at 10 p.m. kind of person. I thought, wow, I really don't want to look at something at the moment. But we don't have to pull at this thread. Let's not make it about me.
Like, get away.
But I talk about how great journaling is, but I also think it's important to acknowledge, and I am in that place where I'm like, I kind of feel like I don't know how to do it. I kind of feel like I don't want to do it. It seems boring to me at the moment, but there have been many times where I really find it very helpful, and I no doubt will again, probably quite soon. But in the last couple of days, But I know that you were gonna, and I'm deliberately talking to stop you asking more questions about me. And I know that you were gonna do some journaling before we recorded today. How did that go?
Actually, before I answer that question, I find it refreshing to hear you say this.
I knew you would say that as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I did.
Well, because, I imagine that journalers are just avid and they just never waver in their relationship to it. And so it's nice to hear that you have periods of feeling this way. We decided this topic was something we threw out there, over a month ago or just about a month ago, maybe. And we sat down to record before we both went away. And I asked you if we could postpone it because I had wanted to give myself time to actually journal because I don't anymore. And I used to journal very regularly. I would say, from the time I journaled as a kid, and I journaled definitely as a preteen, in my teens, all throughout college. But post college, I just stopped. Every now and then I would try to dabble in. But as time has gone on, I have found myself becoming more and more distant from it. And so because we were doing an episode on it, I wanted to give myself the opportunity to re-engage just so I would have something to say or something more to say. And at the time when we were going to record this last time, I had every day I was like, journal, because we're doing this episode, and I'd be like, nope. I had a lot of resistance and I wasn't doing it. So I said, give me a month. So a month has gone by and I have journaled a total of maybe 7 or 8 times. And I do not feel any closer to being able to talk about this than I did then, and perhaps even less so, although maybe that is in itself something to talk about. I don't like it. I find it In fact, last night I went to bed and I was like, "Oh, I should journal one last time before the episode." And I sat in front of the screen, and for some reason I'm just like, the only way I can get this done is on a computer rather than handwriting. And I just looked at that screen and felt such a rise of no. Not just no, but like sassy no. And I didn't, because I'm like, I don't. And I think what's coming up is that I am not getting anything from it. And a client of mine recently sent me some of her journal entries that she wanted me to look at. And I was like, wow, she journals almost the way I write articles. Like the way that I actually think about what I'm going to say is how she was journaling. Whereas my idea of journaling is just this free form flow of consciousness that makes me more anxious than anything else. And so I think that it might be helpful to talk about ways to journal, or even things like guided journaling, as opposed to people like me, this what might be unhelpful for people like me. It's almost activating to go into the mind when the mind feels disorganized. I know that the point of journaling might be to organize, but I find it the opposite. I find that it is actually more disorganizing to me, and I would much prefer to think about it. I found that I wasn't really getting anything from writing things out. I get more from thinking about it. I'd prefer to think it through. It happens faster. I think I make more connections. Writing it down slows me down and muddles it somehow.
Because what I find interesting is that you were an avid journaler. So was it helpful for you at one point or not?
It must have been, because I kept doing it. I don't think it was helpful for clarity. What I mostly hear from people who feel like it's helpful is that it's like, oh, it opens these insights. And I think I'm just someone who thinks, and I do that thinking. Writing for me for as helpful as it's been, has been more of a way of just putting it out there, of offloading it out of my head and just putting it in the world. Maybe a validation of sorts, like naming something and then reading it back feels validating, but not for clarity. I don't think it's ever helped me come to new realizations.
Well, I know it definitely has for me. And some of the people in our group as well. One person put in the group that it was helpful for them to tease out childhood memories that they'd kept hidden from themselves. Do you relate to that idea that there are things that can be hidden from us?
No. And I think that's why it's a difference.
Uh-huh. Maybe just even how you process stuff. You're not maybe the kind of person that puts things in a dark corner
I'm
of
not.
your mind. And it's not conscious. I kind of want to speak on behalf of those of us that do this. It's not a decision of, oh, I don't want to think about that, so I'm going to push it out of my mind. It's like the brain does it automatically as this protective thing, and we have to go looking for it. It's
Yeah.
not just forthcoming.
I think that is a big difference, because I could understand why journaling would be absolutely beneficial. I actually have the opposite issue. I think this actually comes from, I've talked about my family's boundaries before and how we're like up in each other's business. That's where my brain is. It's like, let me tell myself everything, bad, good, and otherwise, like that. I just put it all out there. And it's like, some of it I wish would just move away. It's just, I don't need to always. I think that's why it's like there's nothing to uncover here. It's just like I really.
That's funny.
But there was a member of our group who, I forget if it was in the support call, where she said, I was binging and I was having these food thoughts return this, and she's like, and then I remembered journaling, and I sat down and I journaled and realized A, B, and C, and then I stopped binging. Like it was such a textbook scenario of journaling being helpful for this exact purpose, where it was like it helped her clarify and see something that was actually going on in her mind, so that it got out and she was able to process that, deal with the thing, and then the binging didn't have the purpose anymore.
Yeah.
um in a best case scenario, I think that's what journaling is really great for.
Well, it's finding language, and maybe your brain is pretty good at finding the language quickly and in your head. But I can definitely relate to having those moments, an overwhelming, let's say a binge urge. And then once I've stopped and put some words on it, I can make sense. But in order to do that, putting pen to paper is really helpful. or has been really helpful. Well, it still is really helpful in many ways as well.
For those who process in the mind more efficiently than on the page, which is such a weird thing to say because I do really like writing, but in a different context. Um, Sometimes what I'll and you know how I'm a big I love offering journal prompts. It's one of the, I love it. But I also would offer, and I do offer to clients who aren't amenable to journaling or who have a resistance around it, to just think of it as thought prompts. And part of me is thinking, you can sort of almost journal. I suppose it's a bit different, but you can process in your head and through thinking prompts. I'm sure it translates a little bit differently because there is a different something different happens in the brain when you're writing. But for some of the benefits of journaling, I think you can get them through thinking, if that's how you work. So I find thought prompts to be more helpful to me than journal prompts. It's the journal prompt that I just think about. And that gets me, I think, to the same place. That's what I was trying to test over the month. And I found that thinking prompts actually helped me get to a more productive place than the journal prompts. What the journaling did do, though, I will say this. I should pull them up. I was like, okay. And I was like, I'm going to purposefully think one sentence at a time. Because what will happen is that I'll think faster than I can write. And I was like, okay, I'm going to think one sentence at a time. So I could feel my thoughts slowing down because I was making them. Like, it was like, just stay in this sentence, just stay here, like, don't go. And in that, there was a bit of, like, there was a regulation in that for me of, oh, this is a space where I am supposed to go slow. So I give myself permission to do that. But in times where I was journaling in the midst of a busy day, that going slow, you know how you'll hear sometimes people say that breath work or meditation is actually more activating for certain people than others? It felt like that to me. It felt more activating. It felt like going that slow was not what I need. It wasn't helpful. It was not helpful. And whereas in times where I was journaling, where it was the end of my workday and my kids weren't immediately outside my door and I did have the space, that moving more slowly was a lot more helpful. So there's something in, like, when are you journaling? Where are you? What are you forcing it, or does it feel like an invitation? I think the state of yourself as you journal may have to do with how productive it is for you. At least this is what I've gathered over the past month. I don't know if you ever feel like that.
I know what you mean, and I guess my counteract to that is I I do this thing where I will dump it all down on the page, get it all out, put the words on it, and it would be like the ravings of a madwoman if anyone read it.
Yeah.
I do this thing where I switch to this sort of intentional thing. So it used to be old journals would be like, I don't know, begging for help for some kind of higher power, or like, what do I do? Like, help, help, help. Now it's much more, I do this may, I use the word may. So I'm jumbled up, I'm stressed out, like, may I feel more peaceful and grounded? May I have more clarity? It's like an intention, but I use this word may. And I haven't never really thought about it till I was thinking about this episode. If I were to just rant, vent, 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 and then just cut it off at the vent, sometimes
Mm.
that's going to feel cathartic and sometimes it's not going to feel
Yeah.
cathartic. I feel like I've just spiraled into something. So then it's almost this like, okay, what is it that I need? What is it I need to be able to do for myself? And it's normally like much more about the state that I'm trying to get back into. So it
Hmm.
might be, may I be patient? So sometimes when I'll journal before I run a group or something like that, I'll journal, not necessarily journaling anything particularly big. And then I'll be like, may I be patient and kind? May I have access to, I don't know, wisdom or whatever it might be. I'm like, I'm setting this intention about how I want to show up now, like having acknowledged whatever this is that's going on. And I find that enormously helpful because it's rather than just focusing on this thing I don't like, these feelings I don't like, this confusion over here, this stress, whatever it might be. And it's acknowledging that and then going like, and now what? But not in a
Right.
very concrete way. Not like, oh, I'm going to go and do this and I'm going to go and do that. And I have to do it like this.
I would never think about journaling in that context, but I like it better. And that's perhaps something that we can talk about, are like, what are different ways of using journaling that isn't just about brain dumping or, like the catharsis diary of a mad woman type thing, because that's how I think about journaling. I think about like journaling is supposed to be you getting something out. But to me, it sounds a lot I'm more interested in seeing like what would happen if I tried to write about an intention.
If you would like to come and connect with us in person, we're going to be in Dublin on Saturday, the 16th of September 2023. We're going to be teaming up with the Intuitive Eating Hub for a workshop, followed by a social at a local Irish pub. We would love to meet you and hope you can join us.
And don't forget, you can still join our community of listeners by signing up on Patreon for access to monthly support calls, an active private Facebook group, and regular Ask Us Anything bonus calls. Links for Dublin and for the community are in the show notes. I also, a few weeks back, you talked about the value of questions. I think we talked about it in an episode we recently edited about how a question will help you focus. And I find that that's exactly what I think I'm gravitating towards answering a question as part of a journal prompt, something that contains a little bit and gives a way to focus something. Actually, it's like interesting to me to think about like, how do you journal? Like having read my client's journal entries, it was like, oh, that's interesting. It's like an article. It's like something she's thought about and put things together and maybe even researched some for, which is maybe not typical, but like what do your journal entries look like? I mean, I suppose you just sort of gave us a little bit of insight into that, but are there other ways of journaling, or what are other ways that you have tried?
Well, in the past, I used to be much more self-conscious even when I was journaling, because I would always be imagining, okay, if I died and someone finds my journal, or even
Yeah.
God forbid I'm still alive and someone finds my journal entries.
Oh,
So I remember this kind of self-consciousness even when I was writing it, where I'm imagining someone else reading it. And I think that was
yeah.
sort of interfering with the journaling process until, I mean, the modern age is amazing, till I've got this.
Yeah.
For the purpose of the listeners, I'm holding up my Remarkable, not sponsored by, Remarkable, which is an electronic notebook, which is it's got a pin on it, so it's protected. No one can get into it. Even if something happens to me, like this is gonna be destroyed along with me, everything in it. And that has removed all self-consciousness around journaling. Because there've been many times when I have journaled in the past and then I have destroyed the piece of paper.
Really?
I did that a lot.
I have a client who said to me that her parent had read her journals as a teenager and ever since had not journaled because of this. And so I went looking, and there's apps like this as well, where you can journal and it just gets rid of it for you. Like it doesn't save it anywhere. So I sent this to my client, and then I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me try it. And I was like, no, if it's not going to be stored, why would I bother?
Uh-huh. Interesting.
I mean, yeah, it was interesting. I was like, oh, am I writing this for others? Like, am I writing this with like, why do I need to make this mark? It feels like if it disappears, it never really, I don't know, but I don't like the idea of it disappearing.
And the idea of reading them back, I actually did the other week ago. I actually did the other week go back over and have a look. I read through my New York journals while I was there, and it left me feeling a bit sad, actually. And somebody else said that they've noticed that when they read it back, all sounds really negative, and it kind of it is because it's the hard stuff that I'm processing. It's not normally a case of I'm having a wonderful day, so I wanna sit and write about how wonderful this is because I want a record of that. No, it's a processing thing. So therefore, I'm only writing really when there's something that I want to process, unless it's a
Mm.
separate thing. So, the other amazing thing about, the Remarkable is that you can have different notebooks for different things. So I have my main journal. Let me get it out. Stand by. Okay, so there's like a mega file called Personal Notes. And then at the top, my first notebook is called Daily Intentions. And I looked at that one, I'd forgotten it was even there. And I haven't written in that one for like 6 months. It was one that at times I've gone through stages where I would get up and I would just write a few intentions for the day. So if I open that now, do you remember what date I came to visit you
I was going to say, is that
in New York last year?
last year? Is that the thing you brought to Central Park?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was April like 28th or 29th.
That's so funny. My last entry is Friday the 29th of April, 2022. Do you want to hear
So
what
that's
I
the last
wrote?
one in there.
Yeah. Sorry?
Ah,
That's the last
that's
time I've
last.
used the intention.
Got it.
So this would have been about you and us. One is to connect, to listen, to find joy in what we're doing.
We
And the
did.
next was to be present. And the next was to appreciate and be grateful. And the last one was to be inspired and creative. I'm not sure what we were doing on the Friday.
We were
Why?
creating the body image course line. EBD.
Well, there you go. Oh, that was an interesting coincidence. So then I've got another folder which is New York. I did a separate notebook for New York because I thought I was there for 7 weeks, so I just did that as a separate one. Got my main one. I've got retreat July written from when I went on the foraging retreat last year for my 40th. I did that as a separate journal. I've got retreat. There's a theme here. I've got retreat September 2022, which would have been last year. And then I've got one that's called What Do I Want, which I think is like a more of a meta, bigger intention one. And the last entry in that is in August 2022.
It's funny because if I had a retractable, is that what it's called?
No.
What is it called?
I think that's how you're feeling. No, it's a remarkable.
Oh. Well, like as I'm listening to your categories of journals, like, oh yeah, well I have that too. I have some of it in my, I write all day long in this, in this, in here and here and here, and none of it's a journal. You know what I mean? Like I think naming it a journal would be is what's hard. I need it to be low pressure, like not a journal, but I write, like when I talk to clients, I keep notes all the time but it's not necessarily, it's just my thoughts about what they're saying. And then I've got the ones in my planner that are more like my intent. Yeah, I put things like that in here, but I just can't make it formal for some reason. And that makes me feel stifled.
Another one that's interesting is how my handwriting changes in different
Yes.
ones. So that's what I like about an electronic notebook as well, is that you're writing with a pen as such on the book,
Yes.
which I prefer to type. I don't think I can type as fast as I can write, and I prefer not to. And so there are times, quite often, my intention setting, which is really interesting, and the what do I want, that's always really neat.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's so intentional and it's so,
Hmm.
this is what I want to focus on and this is what I'm hoping for. Whereas all the stream of consciousness processing is just trying to keep up with like whatever's going on in my head.
Yeah. Do you toggle between print and cursive?
Print as in writing in capitals. Or,
Well, what do you call just not cursive?
well, do you know what you mean by not cursive? You mean just not joined up, like each letter written individually, not touching each other? What do you mean?
Of course. Print.
Then you got to lift. That sounds like really hard work.
Wait, you don't write print?
I don't even know. I've never even heard the expression write print.
Really?
What does that even mean?
Okay, hold on. For the benefit of our watchers, I'm going to show you, and you tell me what you would call this. I mean, one is print and one is cursive.
Yeah, okay. The top one is how children write, and the other one is how grown-ups write.
Are you kidding?
No.
First of all, they don't even teach cursive anymore here. So this is going to be a lost art. Like my children have not learned cursive. So they only know print.
So we wouldn't say cursive, we would just say joined up. So it's joined up writing.
This is fascinating. Never heard that term. Okay, so I guess you don't toggle, but like I love print. I love print. But I notice that when I freeform, I will go into cursive. And I love to look back and look at like, why was I writing like that versus like this? And why would I even go into cursive? I don't like cursive. Like I don't. I always prefer print, but I will go into cursive when I'm writing certain things. But you don't even have a frame of reference for talking about this. So only half of the people are understanding.
But print to me would take 5 times as long as writing joined up. If you've got to like separate every letter, that's just...
Of course, but it's because I write fast. Well, not faster, I suppose, but it becomes second nature.
Can I ask a little bit tangentially, when you were doing your body image course with Jessie Nealand, when you were doing the work on yourself, were there writing exercises involved in that? Was there writing within that processing making peace with your body?
Hold on. She doesn't run this course anymore, but this was the course and this was the workbook that came with it. And it is mostly blank, blank,
Oh,
blank, blank,
really?
blank, blank. Every now and then there's got to be somebody. Oh yeah, here we go. So there's some things that I would write in response to, but I remember having the same feelings back then of like, I don't want to formally do this. I would rather think about it. So then here I have some comes up. I did get to some.
In print or cursive?
Print, of course.
Okay.
Uh, and then I'll section it off. So that's another thing that I do when I'm pen to paper. I notice that I have a section here and then I section off here and I say, it becomes like a big maze of my thoughts and how they connect. And then it starts growing. I remember doing this and I remember I got more out of the thought prompts than, about thinking about the things than I did about writing them.
Hmm. Yeah. One of the ones that came up in the group was somebody said that they hadn't found journaling particularly helpful, but their therapist had got them to write a letter to binge eating, as a friend and to binge eating as an enemy, and that it was enormously helpful in identifying ways that their binge eating behavior was trying to help.
I think that's viable if you aren't averse to writing.
Well, I remember with my first therapist, gosh, years ago when I was talking about my food struggles in therapy, I remember one day as I was leaving, she asked if I would be willing to write, well, like, I didn't call it a food diary, but basically to like write when I ate about what was going on and this, that, and
Mm.
the other. And I remember when she said it, literally recoiling, and she saw me recoil, and she was like, "Nope, leave it. Don't worry about it." I think my reaction must have been that visible
Yeah.
that she realized straight away that that probably wasn't a helpful thing to suggest. And then I left, and then I did it. Had she been expecting me to do it, I think there would have been this whole complex thing, but I knew she wasn't expecting me to do it. She had sort of
No.
retracted this request or suggestion, and then it felt like it came from me, which is going back to what we talked about in the rebel episode, right? That it
Yeah.
has to come
Yeah.
from us. And that was another thing that came up in the group when we were discussing this. A lot of people saying they feel this sense of should around
Yeah.
journaling.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be this amazing processing tool. So I think people hearing you talking about it in the way that you feel about it is really helpful to people.
Well, thanks. Well, I was going to say that I think that's why I do it in planners and client notebooks and emails because there's not an expectation that should happen. The other thing that's coming up for me as I'm thinking about this is the difference potentially between how helpful journaling might be or how we would receive it in a state of depression or low versus anxiety or high. Because as I just described, how it's fallen off more after college and more recently in my 30s and 40s, that's also the trajectory of my depression to anxiety. And so when I was depressed, I was writing a ton more. And I still think that I'm much more likely to want to write when I'm depressed than I ever am when I'm anxious. And I wonder if there's something there. Do you feel that? Do you feel like when you're lower, it's easier to write?
I think there's a middle ground for me because there's a point where if I was too low, I just wouldn't. It would just be no. So I think there's a definitely. I hear what you're saying about the dipping low, as opposed to I guess when I've got more energy, I tend to want to use the energy for other things, or sitting down and journaling.
Because I'm remembering the times when it was so helpful. I mean, I've got pages upon pages of journal entries, especially on the computer from times when I was depressed. Things that in our very earlier episode where we read from our journals, those are all from that time, or many were. And I just found it so inviting to write from that low place. Almost like I was so disconnected from myself then, or so lost that writing was this anchor, or it was a place where I might figure out where I was because I couldn't tap into that otherwise. I think in a depressed state, I don't have as much access to my thoughts the way I do when I'm more up, when my energy's higher, because there's a cutoff, there's like a bit of a freeze, right? Like, and there's a numbness. So I'm not hearing myself so much. So when I go to the page, I hear it. Whereas when I'm anxious, or I don't even want to say anxious, I want to stop categorizing myself as that all the time. I have a higher energy now. Um, and there's just more, I hear myself. So anything I write down is like, that's nothing new. But when I'm lower, it's like a different bridge.
What's coming kind of together in my mind and clarifying is I can't imagine wanting to write when I'm low, just about wanting to write when I'm low. So for me, the writing, there's always an intention to try to understand something and to try and see something or to try and exorcise something. It's never just about, oh, I'm feeling low and I want to write about how I'm feeling low and record how I'm feeling. That's not it for me. And
Is it a
like
catharsis?
sometimes it's a catharsis, but I would probably say more often than not, it's about a mental organization. And then when I write and I'm trying to see and it's coming together, I'm like, oh, that's why I'm feeling so crappy. When I start writing and putting words onto it, particularly what I'm believing. So for me, a lot of what I'm trying to write out is the story because I want to see the story. But I think there can be the other type of journaling where you're just constantly reinforcing the story.
Yeah,
Which I was
yeah.
wondering that whether that was what you were getting at when you were talking about it, from your perspective in your college days and stuff.
Yes. Although I want to say, actually, that's one word I felt this time. So in the past month when I was writing, what I found was that I almost felt like I was perseverating on negative, and I didn't want to. It was almost bringing me down. Now, when I was writing in college, I was as low as you could get. So I don't even think that it was bringing me any further down. I was already, but it helped me feel like I wasn't alone for some reason. Like it felt like that putting it somewhere and naming it and putting it on a page where it now existed in the world was validating. It helped me feel like I wasn't alone, is the best way that I can put it.
Do you think there's an association for journaling with you now where it just reminds you of how you felt at that time because it was
Yeah,
associated with feeling like that? That it
that's a good
almost puts you into a
question.
state? Yeah.
I found that when I started to journal this time, I was like, I don't know how to journal other than like, I kept coming up with the same way I would write then. I'm like, I need a whole new approach because it feels so reminiscent of then. I just feel like the same saga like vibe would come up, and then I would so that's why I was thinking, oh, if I had a question or some other way of doing this, it might feel like I could develop a new association with it or a new purpose for it.
Well, one thing that someone shared in the group, which I thought was really interesting, was, and this is Becca who shared this, because in her mind, like journaling should be neat. And once you start it, you start the practice, you do it regularly, you got the pretty notebook and all of that. And so it was a place for her to really challenge her perfectionism that wasn't around food, because this
Mm.
was like the pattern that was playing out everywhere. So she was able to almost through the act of journaling and the practice of that and challenging all the stuff that came up around journaling was less active than what was coming up around food, but really helped to start challenging some of the perfectionism, which I thought was really interesting.
Unless it backfires, I feel like sometimes it's activating to do that. Have you ever art journaled? Like journaled and drawing? Have you ever tried to?
No, no. Oh my goodness, no. How long have you known me?
Oh, of course. Sorry.
I didn't even doodle. I
Non-visual.
mean,
Oh,
yeah.
that'd be so. I think you might be worth trying. I've tried that.
And
As a non-artistic person, I haven't gotten very far with that. But some people really like it because they think in imagery or they can tap into that part of the brain more so than words. So that's sometimes, or where it's like you draw what you're feeling or something like that. I'm going to do that right now.
that really makes my brain go, "What are you
I
talking
mean, it
about?"
could be abstract.
No, it's
It's not
great.
like I wouldn't draw like, I'm definitely going to draw something abstract. I don't even know what I'm feeling, but let's see what comes up. It's funny because in my college notebooks, like in my biology notebook and all the courses I took, in every white space around the notes that I took is the word hello. Hello, hello, hello. I mean, to the point of like almost like it looks like a mad woman. I'm like, what the heck? How many times can one write hello? And I think about that sometimes because I'm like, I think it was me crying for help. I think it was me being like, Hello, I exist. Hello, I
Yeah,
exist, like,
see
at that
me.
time.
Yeah, yeah,
See me. Yes,
yeah.
exactly, and I don't do it anymore, but every now and then when I get a little bit like that, I notice myself going, "Hello, hello, hello." I caught myself, "Oh, I'm doing the hello again," and it's like, "Oh, that's interesting." It's at a time where I feel very unseen.
Can I just say though, when you showed me the example of print and script, it was hello.
I
Do I
know.
need do I need to see you more, Steph?
This is what I drew.
Okay. So for the listeners, what I'm looking at is
Mm.
see, I can't even describe visual things, is lines and loops in kind of a bit of I can see a bit of a heart in there as well. Yeah, there's probably around 12 loops or so in these sort of long curved lines. I think that's the best way to
This
describe
thing
it.
is
Or go to our
bothering me.
YouTube channel. Oh yeah, there's a random straight line that's
I don't
just
like that, but I needed to do it. I don't know.
oh
I don't know,
gosh.
all you artistic folks who can. What about bullet journaling?
Oh yes, I went through that phase. Yes.
I like that. That's more appealing to me. I don't have to get into it, but I could just name it.
I did some colored charts and stuff like that, but it was all around weight loss at that time when I was
Yeah.
young. I don't know that I've tried to use it in another way since then. I've got a beautiful bullet journal as well. I could hunt that out and, and have a play with that. I heard it. But if people want to try or explore whether journaling is going to be helpful for them, what might we say about that? There was one question which I'll just kick off with from the group. I think I kind of know where you'll go with this anyway, but they said, what would we recommend daily or rhythmically versus journaling when I feel like it? Is it helpful to have a routine or a pattern of journaling versus when you feel like it? I can share, having done both, and I did the Artist's Way. Do you know that? The
Mhm.
program? I think it's 12
Yes.
weeks. And part of that is you do morning pages, which is
Right.
every morning, 3 pages of stream of consciousness. And the idea being that even if it's mundane and it's a load of rubbish or whatever, is that you still do it. And I did find that the practice and the discipline of doing that, even the practice of staying with the mundane, it felt like there was something
Yeah.
fruitful in that, being able to do that and acknowledge that. And they talk about it as it's this kind of clearing. So in the morning, you're clearing out all the junk that's just random thoughts and bits here and there that's building up in your mind. And what I did like about it is one, there's no pressure for it to be profound or anything like that. You're just writing. Two, I think because I do like routines, there's something about not having to negotiate with myself about when I'm going to write. What I did notice though is I was doing the course with another 5 therapists, I think, and when other people hadn't been doing their morning pages, I felt really irritated.
Oh, really?
I felt like people weren't doing their homework. And I
Were
was
you?
terrible for doing my homework when I was at
Oh.
school. I was always the one trying to get out of it. But I think there was something about the commitment or I don't know, but I found myself and checking myself on those judgments that I was having of why other people were not committing to this more.
Did it impact your ability to commit?
No,
Okay.
no, it didn't.
Interesting.
I think 'cause I just felt like I think because we were doing this course together and we were doing it as a group of peers. We didn't have a leader leading the group as such, so we were
Mm.
reading it each week, and I'd been the one to put it out and, like, bring people in. I think there was something that I was so committed to wanting to do this course that, when other people hadn't read the chapters and stuff like that, I just thought anyway, this is a complete
Is that
aside.
to do with the fact that you were the one who proposed it?
I think so. I think
The
part of it I
rejection
wanted
of your
people as
proposal? Mm.
I don't know that. I think there was something around because there was about 30 people that were interested. And so in the end, I was having to turn people away. So I think I was annoyed because I thought some people, this is completely, completely
That's
irrelevant to
okay.
what we're talking
I'm sure it
about.
pertains to someone. When you were talking about morning pages, so I've read The Artist's Way and I have thought about morning pages. I wonder if for some people it's clearing, but for other people, I feel almost it's the opposite because I feel like if I were to write down all those thoughts in my head in the morning, I think it would solidify them more rather than get rid of them. Like it would almost make them more real, which is why sometimes writing is more activating because I feel like it brings me down. Whereas normally I would be able to spam some thoughts or disregard them in a way.
But surely they can't bring you down unless you feel attached to them. Because for me, like I get them out, I look at them on paper, and then they're no longer a part of me. That's the getting out. So the fact that they were once in my head, it doesn't matter because they were out. It's
Oh,
almost like you see they're in your head, and then there's a Oh, like this is activating that this is in my head, like you're judging it being in your head?
No, it's just like, yeah, maybe. It feels like you read it and I'm like, "Oh, like, geez, I guess I'm low." Like I wasn't feeling particularly bad, but these thoughts indicate otherwise, So it makes me feel like that's the reality.
What I'm hearing there is that you when in those situations, your thoughts come out and they're not in alignment with what your
Feel.
emotional experience, where I would say often it's the opposite. I put it out and I'm like, "Oh, yeah." Like, my thoughts and feelings tend to match up when I am able to identify both. It's rare that I'm experiencing my emotion as something, but then I've got these other
Mm-mm.
thoughts in there.
Like last night, I was reading through some of the entries that I'd written over the past month. Actually, I enjoyed reading it more than I enjoyed writing it. But I was like, oh, wow, it's quite serious. It's like, I'm not sure I really need to, I don't want to be feeling that serious. Like, I don't need to, I don't know. There's just, here's another question I have to
Hang
take
on,
it in the other.
I'm not gonna
Oh,
hold you I'm
fine.
gonna hold you
You
here.
didn't let me.
No, I was surprised that you let me get away with that. I really was. I was like, "Oh, fair one." Um, but if the thought is there, isn't it better to know? Because you don't know how that
I do
thought could
know.
either be but
I do know, but
writing it
it's like, I have to be careful as an intense human being to not buy into my thoughts so much and the serious. I think very seriously a lot. I know this about myself, that I'm very intense. So if I nurture that intensity, I'm going to convince myself to be depressed. So I have to be lighter. So sometimes when I read the words, it's like, when they're in my head, they're just words and I know what they are in my head. Whereas on paper, they become a conviction. It's like they're unchangeable then, and I can't work with them then. And I write seriously. I don't write lightly. So it's a part of me that comes out on paper, that's like this very serious part of me, whereas in my head I'm able to balance that with all the parts of me. It feels like when you write something, you're writing from one part, and I am many parts. So I can't take that one part too seriously.
Mhm. I get that. I think that makes sense. It sounds like journaling could be very helpful for you. It would just take a long time because you have to
I
talk your
don't got
way
that kind of
through
time. I'd rather just think about it.
it.
Um, but here's a thought. This is an important question because this was a big deal for me. For most of my life, most of my journal entries are about food in my body. So what say you about, kind of cutting through that sometimes? Like, what if the only thing coming out onto the page is the translation of our actual feelings through, I need to control my body. I can't believe I'm doing this with food. Like, how am I going to stop binging? Here's my plan for stop binging. Like, it all is about that. And I think that's sometimes such a cover, or it's like where everything is getting funneled. I remember having a lot of frustration about the fact that that was all I could write about. I couldn't really, all the other stuff didn't seem to matter. I suppose this is part of like the exercise, writing about the other things. But to me, those didn't feel significant enough. It felt like, no, what matters is me fixing my food. That is and that's always, and it was boring to, sometimes reading those again gets boring.
Yeah. And I think that that is a really, really important question because we can write ourselves in circles
Yeah.
about something. And as you're saying, I'm like, I think that's what I've been doing the last couple of days where I feel like I haven't been getting anywhere because I've just been going round and round the same track. And what I need is something to cut through it.
Yeah.
And so if it's something like food, that's where things like the journaling prompts that you love writing for other people and that are great are really helpful, as
Yeah.
are any kind of other writing exercises. It's like, I need to just look over here a bit because if you're just looking in the same place over and over again, it can just be this very
Yeah.
repetitive going around the same motions. So yes, I would say that people need to subscribe to your weekly email to get the journal prompts. I have a YouTube video actually, which is journal prompts. I did one called Journal with Me. And so for some people who might just want to watch a video and sit with someone and then they can pause the video and
Mm.
write on the questions and stuff, that's another one as well. Like we've talked about before, asking ourselves questions, we want to be asking some questions probably within that, which is why I tend to switch the end of my journaling to, okay, and the one that comes up the most are like, may I have clarity of thought and perspective? Because if I have that, quite often, like the other stuff is okay. I can figure it out and I can put things in its place. And then the other one is, may I be present, like fully
Yeah.
present, because that's really helpful for me as well. Although those aren't questions. Questions, I think, are helpful when it feels like something's a bit stuck and you're trying to get the brain to just pull at some different threads.
What journal prompt do you need right now?
I feel like it's something about, and this is not the prompt, but it's something about showing up. I'm wincing even at the words, but something about showing up for myself. I had a real battle with myself yesterday because I had a couple of hours and I was thinking I really should go for a walk. Like the last couple of days I've been working long days, hadn't really had a chance to get out. I was like, I had this hour and a half over lunchtime. You really should go out and go for a walk. I'm staying at my brother's and it's not the usual. I don't know the walks that are nice around here, so I'd sort of be wandering around the streets a bit. There wasn't the familiarity of what I
Mm.
wanted from a walk. And so I was having this moment with myself where I was going, it would be really good to go for a walk. Like, you've been stuck indoors, to get outside, make the world bigger. And I really didn't want to. And I was just sort of stuck in this. And I was like, okay, I can feel that this resistance is so strong and I don't even know what to do with it. So it's just going to have to be allowed to be. And I didn't judge myself too harshly for not going. But I can still feel there's this kind of resistance of something in me to doing anything at the moment. I don't know whether it's because at the time of recording this, I had my 7 weeks in New York. I've been away for a week. I'm now back in London, but I'm homeless.
Right.
There's something in me that wants to almost like cocoon and just go
Yes.
under the
I was
duvets.
gonna say that.
And there's a sense of that, and there's also a sense of not wanting to do it as well. Like both of those things are existing at the same time. So maybe the journaling is something about holding this conflict between these two parts, and
Mm.
maybe these two parts need to have a voice.
Yeah, like a parts conversation here.
Yeah,
There's a part of you that's asking for something. It makes a
yeah.
lot of sense to me why it would.
Hmm.
I mean, given the place you're in and what you've come out of and what you don't even know where you're I mean, like, there's a lot of uncertainty. It makes sense that there'd be part of you that's like, "Oh my god, just stay really still." Like, what is happening?
Yeah. And there've also been builders in here for 3 days as well, so even here, I haven't had my own space, and they've been coming in early in the morning, so I haven't been able to do my yoga in the morning,
Mm.
and so that's just making everything as well feel kind of
Yeah.
fragmented and out of
Oh, I
routine as
feel
well.
that.
So,
I
yeah,
see
I think
what you're
that's just
feeling.
how I'm feeling a bit now.
Mm.
I know we haven't given a great deal of advice about journaling here, and there's something here around the direct advice. If you're someone who is resistant to journaling anyway, me and Steph going, "Do this, try this, do whatever," is gonna be another thing that you might should yourself with. So, we've kept the conversation deliberately vague. Not
Deliberately.
vague, deliberately vague. Not vague, we haven't been vague, but deliberately non-direct to just share some
Yeah.
other ways of thinking about journaling because, yeah, if this is something that you wanna try and practice, it needs to come from you because you feel like this is something you want to do and will actually be helpful for you, and it's okay if journaling is not helpful for you as well, is the message, I think. Any other messages?
I feel like I've reaffirmed for myself that it's okay that I don't journal. But I also feel a curiosity about joining a journaling group if that ever becomes something I really do want to investigate more, which I don't right now. But if I ever do, I think the way I would go at it is to do because when you were talking about your video of journaling with you and pausing it, I was like, oh, I'd do that. I like that. I also liked the parts idea. So maybe having a more specific approach to journaling as opposed to this wide lens of vague open-endedness is just maybe that's just not for me right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, agreed. Can I just say that this cat, 'cause I'm cat sitting at the moment, this cat that's here reminds me of you.
What?
So this is I'm gonna show you. That's Rufus, right? And Rufus is he's a Bengal cat, and he's a strong, lovely boy, just like you, Steph. No,
I'm like, can we
it's a
why?
lovely So whenever I see my sister-in-law interacting with this cat, she strokes him so firmly that I'm
Mm.
always like, "That's a bit rough," and, like, she pats him and stuff, and whenever I've been here before, he's always been much more wary of me, and I've always been someone like, I'll stroke a cat very gently and approach them softly and all of that, and he always seems a little bit not agitated, but just not quite settled. So anyway, this time I'm like, "Right, I'm gonna go at it with the same gusto that Kate does." Well, we have bonded. And it just made me think of you with your massages. It's like, this
Yes.
cat wants to be firmly handled and
Yes.
then he's like putty in your hands.
deep pressure.
Yeah,
All have different systems.
exactly.
Okay, that didn't go as poorly as I thought it might. I don't know where you're going to go with that.
And on that note, we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.